Good day everyone. Today we'll be tackling about ideas and terms. But before we formally start, let me ask you if what comes into your mind if you hear the word idea. If we hear the word idea, we can conclude many thoughts, or we can say meanings, definitions, or etc. But what does idea mean? The term idea is derived from the Greek word eidos, which means image. Image is the representation of the external form of a person or in art. Our mind contains ideas which are formed through our encounter with reality, with everything knowable through the human mind. This is the reason why idea is defined as the representation of the essence of a thing in the mind. Expressed differently, an idea is a mental, intellectual image or a picture of the object in the mind, which is the result of comparison, reflection, or abstraction. Being a representation of the essence of a thing in the mind, ideas always exist with due reference to reality. This means that the mind does not invent, set up, or make ideas as if they exist on their own so that they are independent of any reality. Ideas do not float in thin air. They are always conceived by the mind with due reference to reality. It says here that ideas are formed through our encounter with reality, with everything knowable through the human mind. For example, I am your teacher and I gave you some familiar words and I told you to give your thoughts or ideas to it. And then you can easily understand the word that I gave to you because it is familiar and you have already your knowledge, right? Next is an idea is a mental intellectual image or a picture of the object in the mind which is the result of comparison, reflection, or abstraction. Like for example, silver and gold. If we compare these two as an object, you can say that silver is better than a gold. It is because of the texture, the color, or how it looks like. And or we can say that the gold is more elegant than the silver. It will depend on how on how you reflect it through your idea. Next, ideas always exist with due reference to reality. Any objects, persons, animals, happenings we'll encounter every day, we can always reflect and compare through our ideas, thoughts, and etc. How ideas formed. In the preceding pages, we made mention of simple apprehension as one of the mental operations that the mind undertakes for purposes of achieving correctness of the thinking process. And it is exactly through simple apprehension that the mind forms ideas. But how does the mind form ideas? It is, however, a subtle conviction among philosophers, specifically the scholastics. Scholastic comes from the Latin word scholasticos, of a school with the Greek root scholasticos. Yes. And it is, however, a subtle conviction among philosophers, specifically the scholastics, that human knowledge begins with the senses. It was the progenitor of scholasticism, Aristotle, who pioneered to spawn the dogma that it is through the senses that all human knowledge begins. This made the scholastics declare with confidence, nothing can come to the intellect without passing through the senses. But how do senses help the intellect form ideas? If ideas are formed through simple apprehension, asking the question, how do the senses provide the intellect with idea, is to raise the same question. So logicians are quick to say that simple apprehension is formed through the following processes. First is the sensation. Second, attention. Third, abstraction, reflection, comparison, analysis, and synthesis. So along these processes, let's define each of them. First is sensation. As already mentioned, whatever awareness that comes to man's external senses, namely sight, touch, hearing, taste, and smell, is a product of sensation. And the interpretation of this information brought about by sensation is called perception. Perception means the ability to see, hear, or become aware of something through senses. Each of these external senses of man perform a specific function. This means that normally there is no mixing up of specific objects of perception. Man's sense of sight, visual perception, helps man perceive color and etc. Visual perception brings ability to make sense of what the eyes perceive. His sense of hearing, auditory perception for perceiving sound. Auditory perception means the ability to receive and interpret information that reach the ears through audible frequency waves transmitted through the air or other means. His sense of touch, tactile perception, for determining the texture of surfaces of objects, be they rough or smooth. His sense of taste, gustatory perception, for perceiving whether objects are sweet or sour, among others. His sense of smell, olfactory perception, for perceiving odors of objects. Therefore, through sensation, a person beholds a particular stimulus or phenomenon or any observable thing as a sensible object. Next, we have the attention. The mind does not end with the data provided by the senses. It attends to what the senses perceive. This means that the mind focuses or fixes its consideration on a single or multiple objects, and the mind does this by way of partial or complete exclusion of all other objects. Like, for example, you are listening to what someone is saying while ignoring some conversations in the room. Like, you are focusing on one person of what he or she is saying while excluding other conversations. Third one is abstraction. By abstraction is meant an act by which the mind discerns the accidental and the essential notes, features, or aspects of an object. For example, this small square and red table stands beside a chair. The table need not be small in size, square in shape, red in color, nor must it necessarily stand beside a chair. In other words, the table may be small or big, square or circular, red or brown, or it may stand anywhere else, yet it is still a table. The essential notes are those which are necessary for a particular object to be that object. Hence, the essential features of an object are those which make an object as such. Thus, through abstraction, the mind discerns the essential features of a thing, leaving out the accidental ones. The fourth one is the reflection. This mental operation is also called reflex mental activity. Accordingly, it is the turning of the mind upon itself or upon its states or acts. Through reflection, the mind studies or considers the objects or things objectively. Like, for example, reflection of light, sounds of waves, or waves of the ocean. Next is the comparison. Through comparison, the mind comes to a direct awareness of the likenesses and differences of the object of attention through which the mind has formed an idea. In the mental operation called comparison, it is the comparing of ideas in the mind which the mind attends to, and therefore not the comparison of external objects of attention. Like I said a while ago, I gave you some example about silver and gold, and now let me give you some example again. For example, we say gold and mountain. In comparison, the mind compares the idea gold and the idea mountain. Obviously, the mind can never come up with a conclusion in its comparison between the ideas gold and mountain if it does not have any knowledge of what is a gold or a mountain. Presupposing that the mind has the knowledge of what is a gold and what is a mountain, the mind can draw the likenesses and differences between these two ideas. Thus, through comparison, the mind distinguishes the relation between the idea gold and mountain through their likenesses if they have any, and differences. So the sixth one is analysis. This is an act through which the mind resolves an idea through the essential notes or features of a particular object. Take for example the idea animal. Here the mind considers the essential notes or those ideas that come together as they form single idea. For the idea animal, the essential notes necessarily pertain to bodily and living objects or things. Hence, the mind discovers that the makeup of the idea animals that it must be bodily and living among others. Like for example, another example is a human being. The last one is a synthesis. This is an act through which the mind puts together two or more ideas into one, as its mind makes these ideas the essential notes of a single idea. Like, for example, when the mind puts together the ideas red and rose, it grasps or understands only the essence of what a red rose is, and not the separate ideas red and rose anymore. Like, for example, I will give you another example. When the mind puts together the word mac and cheese, if we say this, food will come up to our mind. And we don't have to matter each one of them. We'll just combine them and understand as one. We don't need um, them to separate. It must borne in mind, however, that an idea or a mental image is not exclusively formed by external senses of man, because man's internal senses, specifically memory and imagination, are also capable of having mental images. And imagination are also capable of having mental images. Therefore, we can say that an idea or a mental image is a representation of an object in the mind, whether this representation is acquired by man through mental image. Representation is acquired by man through one or more of his external senses, or through his internal senses, namely memory and imagination. Through his memory, man stores the ideas in his mind, and through his imagination, constructs images of objects in his mind in the absence of objects. Accordingly, the result of imagination is what logicians call phantasm. Phantasm is an illusion, which is a concrete and a sensible image drawn by the mind from a concrete and sensible object. Logical qualities of ideas. After having discussed the meaning and nature of ideas and the processes involved in the information of ideas, we are now ready to discuss the logical qualities or properties or elements or constituents of ideas. The two fundamental qualities of ideas are comprehension or connotation and extension or denotation. The first one is comprehension. It refers to the totality of the essential notes, qualities, characteristics, or attributes which the idea imply. So the term comprehension describes the capacity to comprehend written language. Unlike the ability to identify words, it is different. Understanding words in a text without understanding whatever they represent doesn't really achieve comprehension, which is the aim or objective of reading. Consider a scenario when a teacher assigns a text for a student to read. The youngster can read an entire chapter, but when pressed to justify what was read, he or she is unable to do so. What was read gains meaning when it is understood, just like what I discussed a while ago about idea. Like, idea is observing. So if we will observe the things, objects, or words, we can conclude many thoughts in our mind, but we don't just have to observe it. We need to understand every little details of objects, things, and etc. And that's what we call comprehension. Next is extension. Refers to the totality of all objects which the idea represents or to which the idea extends its application. In other words, extension means the groups of individuals or an individual object which are included in the scope of the idea and to which the idea may be applied. So by using education, extension seeks to influence human behavior in a way that is more desirable. Their understanding, mindset, expertise, insight, goals, actions, and confidence may all change. Changes in knowledge result in changes in people's